there's a few principles on grief, and some of those will just reveal themselves as we go through the process. I just want to let you know that this might not necessarily, you might connect with it, you might not. The grief process is very particular. It's based on a few different principles, but what it boils down to is that grief is the perceived loss of that which we seek. What it really boils down to perceptually in the structure, it's the perceived loss of that which we seek or the perceived gain of that which we try to avoid. And when somebody dies, but you could have a grief process over anything, okay? And it's an amygdala response. It's a survival brain response. That's why there's a certain set of questions and a certain process you can go through, and very consistently, I can help guide somebody from grief into gratitude. Usually takes about an hour and a half to, depending on the situation. It can take anywhere between 90 minutes and 3 hours, but grief can be transcended. Um, and so, yeah, it's a loss. It's a perceived loss of that which we seek, and a perceived gain of that which we try to avoid. Now, when we grieve the loss of something, we're not grieving the loss of the things that when somebody dies, for example, we don't grieve the loss of the things that we dislike. We grieve the loss of the things we liked in the person. So when you ask anybody, what are you grieving the loss of? They'll say, like, their hugs, special attention that I got from them. It'll be I don't know, their smile, for example. It'll be a trait, action, or an inaction. The way we used to go for walks. I don't know. It'll be some of these things, but you won't miss their farts. You won't miss their criticism. You won't miss them yelling at you. You know what I mean? So you won't miss some parts, but you'll miss the parts that you infatuated with, that you enjoyed, that you liked about the person. So that's the first principle on grief, is that you only grieve the loss of the things that you like. You are relieved. Relief and grief are entangled events inside the brain. Remember, you can't have one without the other at any point perceptually, because your brain registers through contrast. So at the same time you're grieving the loss of somebody, when you look carefully, you're also relieved of the other side of them. This process works in relationship or a breakup. It works anytime you start grieving, because you can grieve the loss of money. So you can grieve the loss of a job. So just know that this process is cross-contextual, right? When somebody is dying and starting to die, so for example, with our father who has Alzheimer's, he's losing his memory. Now, and he's acting in certain ways. His behavior he just doesn't remember shit, but he still kind of behaves like that. If you didn't know he had Alzheimer's and you knew him before, you'd be like, oh yeah, he's just the same. He just talks in a bit of a loop. But I could say I'm grieving the loss of his work ethic, for example, if he started sitting on the couch all the time and I got sad about that. Does that make sense? Or it could be like if him and I used to have these deep and meaningful conversations about physics, which we never did, but let's just say hypothetically. And now he can't remember physics. And I would start to have a grief. I would perceive the loss of those conversations. Then I could do the process on this. So he doesn't have to actually be dead. It's whenever a grief activation takes place in the brain. All right. So is that making sense to everyone so
Mhm.
far? So that's one of the key principles in this, is that remember, you only grieve the loss of things that you enjoy. This is particularly poignant for breakup. You know what I mean? Like, it really works well for breakup. Because it's the same process in the brain. Animals grieve as well, by the way. That's why it's an animal brain response. So this is because it's linked to survival. It's still life or death. You're grieving the loss of the food. That what you perceive that you liked in the individual represents food at the survival level of the brain, the most fundamental level of the brain. That's what it represents. So the loss of the food creates the grief response. So that's the first fundamental. The second fundamental for this process is that energy is never built or destroyed; it just changes form. So any of the traits that you never gained or lost a trait in your life, and I can demonstrate this. When you've when traits come in, they collapse into one person or they go into the many, one to the many, one to the many. It's a law of it's a thermodynamic heat law. It's transferred. And I can demonstrate this every time that when you think you've lost a trait and I ask you to find the new form of the trait, you'll be able to see it. Now, at certain points, it takes a bit of mental abstraction, a few different levels of mental abstraction to be able to see where the new form is, because it comes in, the new forms will always be dictated by your value structure. So that's it's a key point. It might not make sense to you now, but going through the process, you'll be able to see that. So right now, I just again want to give a bit of education. Now, some of you have experienced this before. I've done this process on myself a number of times. I've been facilitated with it and also done it personally. Keegan, we did the process with you, and it was quite powerful and landed as well. And so, having a bit of this kind of like background will just make sense to you as to why I'm asking certain questions. The third thing, principle, is that part of grief is a social construct. Now, you've got a physiological part, which is, we grieve the loss and we have the tears and everything like that. So that's natural to have that. We don't have to stay in that, but it's a natural response. Okay. The other part of it, though, is that we've been told that when you grieve somebody, when someone dies or someone exits, to grief, you need to have the tears and you need to cry and you need to do all these things, or you didn't really love them. I've taken people through the grief process that were about to go to funerals and they couldn't cry at the funeral. And then the potential social rejection is what they got upset about. Because in their heart, they had gratitude for the person, not grief. They had gratitude for the life. So a lot of the time, and I'll put this question out to you guys as well now while we're here. If you guys, maybe not me, because everyone might be partying when I die, like finally David's there, finally someone took him out. But maybe not me, but if you use yourself as the example, when you guys die, do you want everybody to be walking around dressed in black for the rest of their life? Just never smiling, never happy, never moving on? Do you want your entire family to just every day to walk up to the crypt of you and to just make sure they download all the anguish and be like going, okay, just going to church and lighting candles and just only thinking about you and the fact that you're dead and being depressed about it and never getting on with their life and never smiling again? Is that what everybody wants?
No.
No. Or would you prefer that when people thought about you, that their heart lit up and they smiled and had gratitude and thought, you know what, I'm so great. David would have loved this, or Chelsea would have loved this. But they smile, or they see something that reminds them of you, and you're like going, oh, that's beautiful. That reminds me of David or Chelsea or SmackDown or Paulie Keegan. Just like going, wow, that reminds me of them. And then you have a gratitude that comes up. I'm so grateful that I got to share some life with this person. Would you prefer that? That people smiled when they thought about when you passed, and they had an appreciation for your life? See, there's a difference here. There's a sociology that tells us that we're meant to be crying all the time when someone dies, or there's another way of looking at this and saying it's part of life. Life and death are entangled events. You can't have life without death. And removing the fact this and challenging the idea that death is bad and life is good. There's a benefit to dying. We have to die in order for life to remain. I mean, if we never died, the planet would fucking get overpopulated pretty quickly and everything, and we would run out of resources. But we become resources when we die. When you put us in the ground and we become decomposed by all the mycelium in the soil, we become nutrients for trees and plants. And those trees and plants become nutrients for other animals. We're part of the cycle. We're cyclical. It's all cyclical. So we need to die. And we also need to die in order for new ideas to spring forth as well, and for evolution on the planet to remain. So we're part of a bigger whole. So again, when we're going into a grief process, especially around death, it's wise to challenge the ideas around life and death and about acceptable behavior. And because you can keep yourself trapped. Okay, so things never die, they just change form. You've never gained or lost a trait. As soon as if you think that one person's an asshole, then you're always going to have assholes in the people that you think are assholes in the world. You never gain or lose that trait. It just collapses into one person or goes out into the many. That's it. This happens in relationship as well. If you have a lot of, you can have a breakup that could be very intense. And then what will happen is instead of having all these traits that are collapsed into one person, that's why you got together with them, they'll be separated amongst the many. And when you ask the question, who's providing all the things that you're looking for? So if you go through our back catalog, I did a talk on the soulmate, and you find out who's providing all the traits that you're looking for in a mate, you'll find that you're getting them from many people. And the benefit to you is that you don't have to be committed to any one of them in that way. And so you can get on to different priorities. So it's your value structure that's dictating those priorities. So when you can see that, you're not missing anything. It's just coming in a new form. So I'm aware, I say this often, I'm aware that this might not all land completely, but if any of us go through a grief process, and if any of you guys decide that you want to go through that process and we want to do another live facilitation or whatever, we can do that as well. You just let me know. Or if it might come up in our private sessions as well, who knows? But those are just a few principles that guide this process. And again, these are all perceptions, the ways of shifting perception.